We're going to look at two early autobiographies by Native American authors. We're going to look at William Apess, Son of the Forest, and we're going to look at Luther Standing Bear, My People the Sioux. What's interesting about both of these authors and both of these individuals is that they came into contact with white ideology at an early age. And what's really interesting and what's going to be different in these texts from what we're going to read later by later authors such as Sherman Alexie is there seems to be a lacking hostility that we see and we're used to seeing in later Native American writings. What's kind of interesting about these, particularly in Apess's story, is that it's almost like this white ideology rescued him. In fact, Apess even mentions in his text that he was being abused by his maternal grandmother, and he was rescued by Mr. and Mrs. Furman, who were Christians, and who took him in. And he recognized that those who were good, and he had other family members who were Christian, and those people were benevolent toward him, whereas his own culture, the Pequot, what he saw with his family, were not benevolent toward him. So it's a really different sort of a perspective. We also see in Apess' story that he was deeply moved by the indoctrination that he received at the hands of the whites. We see from his writing that he's leaning on references, biblical references. In fact, it almost reads, part of his text almost reads like the King James Version of the Bible, which you're looking at, when did he write this? Oh gosh, I don't have the date in front of me, but he was in the late 1700s, early 1800s. I think he wrote in the early 1800s when he wrote his text. So that's kind of interesting. And then in Luther Standing Bears, he was taken off the Sioux reservation and he went to school. And he went through the whole experience cutting his hair, and there was dissension about that amongst his own people, amongst the boys at the school. But they all ended up getting their hair cut. They got new clothes. All this stuff that he had been through, but what's cool about Luther Standing Bear is he almost looked at it as an experience, something to learn from. But again, the anger is lacking, and I want to draw your attention to that in these two early texts because the anger is lacking. But by the same token, both authors do call out or call into question the behavior of the whites. So it's a really different type of a tone. And in terms of autobiography, I think it's really interesting because both of these authors are looking at early instances in their lives and how they were changed because of white culture. We do know now that it is best to let people continue their culture and to keep their culture alive, but by the same token, the land was changing at that time. Horrific things were done. I'm not denying that at all, but the land was changing. So what I want you to do is you read these two texts for my Native American Lit class, is I want you to notice the tone in these and maybe make note of the tone, because I want us to contrast it later when we get to Sherman Alexie's texts and when we get to some of the later poetry and short stories in this Native American Lit class. So thank you for listening.